What's going on, guys? This is Rob, and if you're enjoying the content that I'm uploading onto my channel, then feel free to subscribe, and you can also offer suggestions on topics and characters and storylines and whatnot that we can have discussions on later on in this channel. So for this week's What If story, I figured we'd do the story of what if the Sentry killed the Marvel Universe. Now, this actually comes out as a what if story as a counterpart to Siege, which is actually issue number 200. It's actually pretty cool. But for those of you guys who don't know, I've done a video on Siege, which you'll find down in the description. But the basis of this was really like the conclusion of everything that had come after Civil War. I mean, we had the Superhuman Registration Act, we had Secret Invasion, we had Dark Reign, where Norman Osborn had replaced Tony Stark as director of S.H.I.E.L.D., and Norman Osborn had looked to basically take over the world. The idea of Siege brought all these things to an end. So it saw the disbanding of the Superhuman Registration Act, it saw the defeat of Norman Osborn, it saw the death of Robert Reynolds in the original story, the death of the Sentry. This what if story takes a different approach. So during Dark Reign, Norman Osborn had basically replaced the Avengers with villains, because for a lot of people out there, they knew about the identity of some of the heroes, but they didn't know all of them. And so, for example, Hawkeye was basically replaced with Bullseye. Norman Osborn himself took over the role of Iron Man, operating under the name of Iron Patriot with the Iron Man armor. We had a multitude of heroes who were essentially just replaced with villains, and then Osborn used them as a way to effectively solidify his reign. Now, we also had groups like the X-Men, which were basically outliers in the sense that Norman Osborn's control at the time was really isolated to the continental United States. And so for the X-Men, they effectively left the continental United States. They formed their own society in a place called Utopia off the coast of San Francisco, and they operated outside of Norman Osborn's control. And so because of this, they were able to basically try to thwart his efforts as best they could, but there really wasn't a whole lot that they could do, because remember, this is a point in the history of the X-Men where the mutant population has been reduced by 98%. So there's only a very small portion of them left who can effectively fight against Osborn. And so during the original Siege event, Asgard, as it existed in Oklahoma, was really like the last bastion of Norman Osborn solidifying his rule and then taking the steps to essentially take over the government and make himself dictator. And so because of this, he had basically brought along a lot of his ilk, his cabal, and led a campaign to take over Asgard. Now the kicker to this was that you still had Thor, you still had a lot of heroes who were there, you had Loki, who was kind of the hidden hand behind it all. But the idea here was that Osborn had gone against the forces of Asgard, and he'd gone against, the Avengers under Captain America when they had realized what was going on, and they basically rallied to the call. And so Norman Osborn was essentially defeated here. In this story, we take a different approach. In the original Siege event, or I guess in the events of Dark Reign, really the events that led up to Siege, Norman Osborn had essentially had the Sentry's wife Lindy killed by Bullseye, and then he had used the emotional state of Robert Reynolds to manipulate him into following the ideologies of Norman Osborn, hence having one of the most powerful beings in existence on his side. With this particular story, instead of fighting Ares, the god of war, on the battlefield during the Siege of Asgard, instead, Robert Reynolds had fought him several days beforehand. And what this meant was that instead of like the original Siege on Asgard story, where Robert Reynolds was basically exhausted after fighting Ares, in this story, he's fully energized. He's lost virtually none of his power. And because of this, he's quite literally a one-man army. I mean, Robert Reynolds goes through, he kills Luke Cage by punching a hole in him. He kills Thor, like he cuts off the head of Captain America. And it was actually really, really messed up. It was funny. It's not funny. That's not funny that Captain America's head got cut off. That's it is funny because like Spider-Woman Jessica Drew's like, no. It's hilarious to me. But the idea here is that Robert Reynolds allowed for Norman Osborn's villains to effectively go through and start killing off what was left of the superheroes. Because you got to keep in mind, Captain America, despite not having any real superpowers per se, is like a moral rallying point for all of the superheroes. I mean, they looked to Steve Rogers as the one guy that was solidified in Brian Michael Bendis' Age of Ultron. When everything had come crashing down, all the superheroes were waiting on Steve Rogers to formulate a plan. That's literally what they were waiting on. They were waiting on him to get his act together to figure out what to do next. They ultimately settled on traveling to one of Nick Fury's bunkers when he was still alive, but the idea was, during Age of Ultron, it was established that Captain America was the rallying guy, and it had always been that way. That story just kind of solidified it as being an absolute truth. But with him being killed here, the superheroes haven't really lost their will to fight so much as they've lost any real measure of organization. And so again, we have the Avengers coming in, much like we did before. We have Iron Man, we have, Wolverine, we have the X-Men, Cyclops, we have them coming in. Of course, the X-Men, again, didn't play a major role in the original events of Siege, but they're showing up here. But it doesn't matter because they're all being defeated by, Robert Reynolds and by these various heroes. And so the way things begin to differentiate is Emma Frost effectively has to watch as Cyclops died. But during this process, Dr. Doom arrives. Dr. Doom steps in and says, hey, we got to get out of here. Like, I have magic that's basically hiding our existence here, but it won't be long before this magic wears off. They realize that we're here and then they kill us. So we've got to bail out because I have a plan. And so she ends up going with Dr. Doom and they arrive back at Utopia. Now again, Utopia is this area where the X-Men are basically operating out of, but there's only a handful of them left now from those who had originally been killed. And so, when the question is, what's your plan? What goal do you have here? We're suddenly met by the arrival of Loki. And Loki is the one that says, hey, I have a plan. I'm the one that has this idea on how we're going to fix everything. And so at this point, we really just kind of have Norman Osborn in the background solidifying his reign in the sense that he informs Carla and he informs Mac, a couple of his henchmen, to basically go and kill the president of the United States, thereby allowing Norman Osborn to solidify himself as absolute ruler of the world. We also have, Bullseye trying to be dealt with by some of these other heroes as well, but it's really just this attempt by them to eliminate as many of Norman Osborn's heroes as they can before they end up getting into Robert Reynolds. Now, following this, Robert Reynolds is actually brought to them by Loki, and this was the plan of Loki himself. His plan was to basically go to Reynolds and to say, hey, Bullseye was the one that killed your wife. Norman Osborn was the one who instructed him to do it. Now, initially, he doesn't believe them, but Emma Frost says, hey, let me use my powers, let me go into your mind, and I'll show you what it is that had happened. And when he sees what took place, he immediately kills her. And the reason why he does this is because Robert Reynolds transforms into the Void. Now, this is a great time to have that conversation because I've seen so many people ask that. I saw in the Siege comments, or the Siege video, people were asking in the comment section, is the Void more powerful than Robert Reynolds? Yes. Robert Reynolds, it's really kind of like his powers are sort of a mishmash. There are some that say that he has the ability to warp reality, and that's kind of been confirmed to a degree in Marvel Comics. There are some that say he's just super powerful, and his power is whatever the writers need him to do at any one particular point in time. Like, that is just what his power is. He has powers of convenience. But the idea here is that Robert Reynolds always has like a moral compass. He always keeps the Void in check. The Void is all the anger and all the hate of Robert Reynolds manifested into a physical being, and it's unbridled power. I mean, just unbridled, untapped, uncontrollable power in the most extreme. And so it's literally just a force of nature is the best way to describe the Void. It is, and it's an insane reckoning. And we see this because the Void literally kills everyone. It kills Dr. Doom. Now, the death of Dr. Doom, which Dr. Doom always seems to die in stories like this, but the death of Dr. Doom is so cool because, the Void says, hey, look, if you want to beg, you can beg. And Dr. Doom says, nope, I don't beg. And so Void says, okay, fine, and just kills him off. No questions, no nothing. Kills off one of the most powerful mystics, one of the most powerful beings in existence. After that, he turns his attention to Norman Osborn and kills Norman Osborn. And so from here, it's basically, humanity launching its weapons, its weapons of war, its bombs and so on against the Void with no effort whatsoever, nothing happening out of this. And after this, the Void basically begins going through and killing all those heroes that just didn't show up at the siege on Asgard. It kills all these beings that just simply didn't make it to that event for whatever reason. And so what we learn is that this entire series of events is actually being watched by a member of the Watcher named Atau. Now, this is actually a deviation from the status quo. In Marvel Comics, all the what-if stories are basically told to us from Uatu the Watcher. And the reason why was established again in the original Sin story when Uatu the Watcher had access to see all the other universes that exist out there. And so it was like we were watching it through the eyes of the Watcher as he was looking at a viewing screen. But what happens is this is actually another guy named Atau who's relaying these events to Uatu the Watcher. And the implication here is that not only does the Void go through and wipe out all life on Earth and destroy the Earth itself, it also seems like the Void is going to eventually destroy the moon and then make its way through the entirety of the universe, killing everything off. Now the question is, could the Void do that? Yes, the Void could easily go through and kill the cosmic entities, kill the Celestials, kill Galactus, because remember, the Void's power is limitless. There's nothing the Void can't do. And so any foe that goes against the Void will have enough power to kill that foe every single time across the board without fail. This is why the character of the Sentry is so derisive in Marvel Comics. And this is, because he's really just kind of like a trump card. Like Sentry enters the fray and then whatever side he's on wins. But it's also the other reason why the Sentry in the comics had always tried to keep the Void at bay, because if the Void were to go unleashed like it did did here, then it would just lead to the destruction of everything. This is really just showing us what happens when the Void, when the Sentry basically lets his guard down and allows the Void to completely take over, and you know what the ramifications would be for a situation like that. It's just the Void wiping out all things in existence. But if you guys are new here to Comics Explained, make sure you guys hit the subscribe button to become part of the Rob Corps. If you guys enjoyed this video, drop a like and leave a comment down below. Let me know what you guys think about the Sentry Robert Reynolds. Let me know how you guys feel about him, because I know he's really popular, but really hardcore comic book fans hate him, but people who are casual fans think he's interesting. So I'm kind of curious to see what side of the field you guys take on this. I like him. I think he's a cool character. I think that he was kind of misused in the New Avengers run when he was folded over. I think his best stories came out of Marvel Knights, but you know, I think that he's still a pretty reasonable character, still decent. I mean, he's dead now. For those of you guys who don't know, by the way, I want to go ahead and bring this up too. For those of you guys who don't know, the Sentry dying in Siege was the last time he officially appeared in Marvel Comics. He was kind of resurrected as one of the Four Horsemen, I think as part of the Apocalypse Twins, but that wasn't really like this Sentry as we knew him. The Sentry as we knew him is essentially gone. The old school Sentry appeared in the Contest of Champions, I think, but that doesn't count. Like the Sentry as we know him is gone. He's never been seen or heard from again. He may come back, but I don't think he will. I think the Sentry is just kind of gone. He was a difficult character to work with anyway. It was difficult to write stories for him because he suffered from the Superman complex, but the fact remains, you know, that we may or may not see him at some future point in time. But with that being said, we're going to bring this video to an end, and I will catch you all later. Peace.
Think I can